Hello all, Rick here with a breakdown of my favourite starship design, the Excelsior class. I've been looking forwards to this. The Excelsior class is a ship whose lineage is pretty well documented in Star Trek, as we are witness to not only its inception, but the eventual phasing out of one of the Federation's most recognisable starships. Of course, it was notable early on for its two roles, that of the replacement for the Constitution class, and also as the testbed for one of Starfleet's Transwarp projects. When the design for the actual Excelsior was being conceived, the desire was to have a new ship that simply looked similar to the Enterprise but bigger and more advanced, reflecting its role. In designing the Excelsior, artwork was actually produced featuring it before the final designs were approved by Industrial Light and Magic. Then those images were handed over to the model sculptors, who then worked on the designs, further evolving it into a ready concept. This led to a myriad of model concepts that were easy to visualise and handle, including several multi-nacelled designs that would even turn up in canon at later dates, considering the models had been made, like the Alka-Seltzer type. Then, out of left field, Bill George created a design based on the premise of a Japanese-style Enterprise, and a very familiar looking Excelsior was created. It was this design that was selected and refined into the final Excelsior we see on screen, and a model built to that final outcome. As with the other origins of starship classes, the fictional origins of the vessel pretty much line up with the original concept. In this case, the Excelsior, both behind the scenes and on screen, was designed to steal the Enterprise's thunder. For around 40 years or so, the Constitution class starship had been the top of the line and the example for Starfleet exploration, undertaking the famed 5-year missions into uncharted space, seeking out new life and new civilizations. It saw numerous overhauls and upgrades throughout its lifetime, which saw it equipped with the latest technologies and developments from throughout the Federation, as well as acting as the trial for some new ones. But there could only be so much accomplished before the Constitution started to show her age. So it was. In 2280, a new design was penned to supplement the illustrious line, and it would also facilitate the planned development of Warp Drive, the Transwarp project. The Transwarp project began its development a decade earlier in 2270, using new methodology to interact with subspace to achieve faster speeds than before. A lot of focus was given to developing this new drive, but the Excelsior itself was to be defined by more than just this new propulsion technology. However, there would be numerous setbacks with the design that would hold it from being developed further. Fortunately, the design proved reliable and adaptable, allowing it to succeed despite this. The initial vessel of this class, the USS Excelsior NX-2000, was finished in 2284, after a year of testing, and was set to begin Transwarp trials a year later. However, thanks to the acts of the Enterprise senior staff, including the theft of the Enterprise and the sabotage of the Excelsior, the trials were further delayed. The damage caused was easily repaired, but the outcome of the project is unknown in canon, but assumed to have failed anyway, as the warp drive was switched out for a regular one, as well as further modifications during a 2-year overhaul in space dock. However, the warp scale of the Federation also saw revision in this era, so perhaps it was not a complete failure, as clearly something warp-related happened around this time that necessitated an overhaul for how warp speeds were calculated. In 2287, the Excelsior was relaunched and the line began production in earnest, while the Excelsior was taken out of its prototype phase and had its registry replaced as the NCC-2000. By 2290, its captain was Hikaru Sulu. However, development of the Excelsior did not stop there, with further alterations being worked on even as new vessels rolled out. These alterations saw an increase in impulse engine output, and a larger secondary hull section among internal modifications, leading to an altered Excelsior variant, the Mark II, or Enterprise variant as it was known. This was for the purpose of creating the Enterprise NCC 1701B, which featured numerous improvements over the original Excelsior design in 2293, benefiting from the line's 6 years of service and befitting the Federation's flagship. However, not all of these improvements were strictly necessary, and not every new Excelsior commissioned was of the Enterprise subtype. Both would continue to be created, although only about half a dozen would conform to this new subtype. This was simply because Starfleet had kind of stumbled onto a winning design, a frame that could be upgraded and was long-lasting, in much the same way as the Constitution had been, but even more so, meaning new Excelsiors were being produced even into the late 24th century, just simply with current technology. The Excelsior class at the time of its inception was the largest Starfleet vessel in service at 511 metres long, 195 wide, and 87 tall across 34 decks. It had a mass of 2,350,000 tonnes and a crew complement of 750, with room for an additional 130 guests. Its emergency maximum was 9,800. Clearly, with this much capacity, thought was given to its role as both a transport and a host to events, such as diplomatic meetings or conferences. Despite the Transwarp issues, the replacement core it had fitted was an uprated 1500 Cochrane version developed from the innovations uncovered during that project. Its maximum warp speed appeared to be warp 9 for a prolonged period of time, and this appears to be the new warp scale that was used by Starfleet going forwards. With upgrades and development, this drive would eventually reach 9.6 by the end of the Excelsior's lifetime. As a quick aside, the Excelsior seems to embody Starfleet's 23rd century philosophy of making ships faster by simply scaling up the warp core. I mean, look at the size of it, and adding more warp coils to the nacelles. Eventually, innovations in both these areas would make future warp systems more conservative, but something about this era makes me smile, just the simplicity of bigger engine, make fast go. In terms of firepower, the Excelsior was a powerful vessel too, with 10 dual-emitter Type 8 FH-11 phaser banks around the saucer section and another 6 single Type 8 banks elsewhere. It had a total of 4 torpedo launchers, while the variant had 6 in total. It was capable of saucer separation, like many vessels before it, but this was an emergency feature, and it had a number of auxiliary craft in its 2 shuttle bays. One bay was primarily for cargo, while the other was for traffic. Internally, the vessel was designed to house many of the developments that had been derived from the Constitution refit project. Thus, many of its systems shared that look. While the initial bridge and designs of the prototype Excelsior were far more spacious, this was overhauled with its refit into a smaller one, more in line with contemporary ships. However, with the long lifespan of the class, it was not uncommon for Excelsiors to receive several overhauls during their lifetimes, and when newer models were constructed, they often incorporated technology from that era that was compatible, which was quite a bit, adding to the Excelsior's extended service. It performed in a multitude of roles, not only as the deep space explorer it was designed as, but it was also large enough to entertain dignitaries and host events on the diplomatic front, and powerful enough to act as a patrol or escort vessel in defensive duties. Its very origin being tied to an experimental drive shows that scientific endeavours were always a part of its mission profile too, making it a great all-rounder. As with the Ambassador and Galaxy classes that would come after it, the Excelsior was the pinnacle of its era's design when it launched. But it had the honour of being a class that lasted well beyond its original era. The robustness of the design and the adaptability of the ship meant that it even outlasted the Ambassador class that was technically superior to it in every way. But the Excelsior only really began to fade from use after the close of the Dominion War, when Starfleet began introducing new ship lines. And then again, several of these new ship lines were undoubtedly inspired by the Excelsior, with the Obena class sharing details and literal Excelsior 2 class Starship being a contemporary redesign from scratch. I would say that it's lazy to reinvent a vessel, but then so many designs are just kit bashes, and you know what? I'm glad it was the iconic Excelsior that received this treatment first in the timeline. So overall, the Excelsior is pretty much my favourite design. Originally, I did not like it much at all, but with time it grew on me, and I think it hits the same design points as the Connie refits, which makes sense as they were from a similar era. Thanks for watching this video on this example of the excellent Excelsior. I've been Rick, and I'll see you later. Goodbye.